Jake Pearson always enjoyed the lively chaos of the interstellar markets. When his ship docked on Nurka 7, he expected a quick trip through the merchant stalls, maybe a drink at a local cantina, and then back to business. What he didn't expect was to be chased through a maze of glowing tents and hovering kiosks by a squad of alien officers armed with plasma stunners. "Stop!" one of them shouted, though the translator in Jake's comm implant rendered it as a garbled mix of sounds. Jake didn't stop. He weaved through clusters of shoppers, gray-skinned Nurkins with elongated arms, blue-scaled Brocari, and a few insectoid Klaxu, before darting behind a rack of shimmering textiles. It didn't matter that he hadn't done anything wrong. The moment he'd seen those officers pointing at him, shouting, and advancing with weapons drawn, instinct took over. A hand grabbed his arm, yanking him into a shadowy alcove. "This way," a voice whispered. Jake turned to see another human. A man with a broad frame and a scruffy beard that didn't quite match the polished leather coat he wore. "Who?" Jake started, but the man cut him off. "Don't ask questions. Just follow me." Together, they navigated a back route through the market, passing by crates of exotic fruit, bins of sparkling minerals, and stalls selling trinkets that glowed softly in the dim light. The sounds of the market, clinking coins, alien chatter, the hum of small anti-grav carts, muffled their hurried footsteps. Jake couldn't help but steal a glance at his unexpected ally. The man moved with practiced ease, as though he'd done this 100 times before. "What's going on?" Jake asked once they slowed down enough to catch their breath. "Name's Rob. Let's just say I've had a few run-ins with the local authorities," the man replied, brushing a hand over his coat. "You looked like you needed a hand." Before Jake could press further, a hovering drone zipped by, scanning the alleyway. Rob yanked him behind a stack of crates just in time. The drone paused, its bright sensor light casting long shadows, then floated off. "Look, I appreciate the help," Jake said. "But I didn't do anything. I was just checking out some navigation equipment at a stall. Next thing I know, I'm being accused of smuggling." Rob shrugged. "Doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. Once they've got you on their radar, you're a target. The Nurkan government isn't exactly known for fair trials." Jake frowned. "So what do we do now? Just hide here forever?" "Not quite. There's a transport hub nearby. If we can reach it without being seen, I know a guy who can get us off-planet. Problem is, we'll have to pass through the central plaza. And that's probably crawling with patrols by now." Jake considered their options. "We could double back, try to blend in with the crowd near the food court." "That might work," Rob said, nodding. "But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more likely they are to lock down the market." As they retraced their steps, Jake couldn't help but notice the way Rob kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning every corner. It was clear this wasn't his first escape attempt. Jake's initial skepticism began to fade. Maybe this guy really did know what he was doing. "You've done this before," Jake said. "Something like that," Rob replied. "Let's just say I've had a few disagreements with local law enforcement in my time." As they approached the food court, the smells of alien spices and grilled meats filled the air. The crowd was thicker here, making it easier to blend in. Jake pulled a scarf from a nearby vendor's rack and wrapped it around his neck, hoping to mask his appearance. Rob gave him a nod of approval. "Good thinking. Just keep your head down and follow my lead." They navigated through the crowd, stopping at a stall that sold what looked like deep-fried plant pods. Rob handed over a few alien coins and passed one to Jake. "Eat. Makes you look less suspicious." Jake bit into the pod, its flavor oddly sweet and tangy. He kept his eyes on the ground, occasionally glancing at the officers stationed at the plaza's entrances. They didn't seem to notice him or Rob. Once they reached the far side of the plaza, Rob pointed to a narrow alley. "That leads straight to the transport hub. From there, we can meet my contact." Jake hesitated. "Why are you helping me, Rob?" The man paused, a shadow crossing his face. "Let's just say I've been in your position before. Nobody helped me, so I had to help myself. I figured I'd pay it forward this time." Jake nodded, a flicker of trust forming between them. Together, They slipped into the alley and continued their journey toward the transport hub, one step closer to freedom. Chapter 2. In the holding cells. Jake sat on the hard bench of his holding cell, his shoulders tight with the tension of uncertainty. The alien facility around him was stark, built from smooth, pale metal panels that reflected the low, greenish light. A faint hum of distant machinery filled the air, broken now and then by the sharp clicking of armored boots on the floor outside. "Hey, human!" came a voice from across the corridor. Jake looked up to see another prisoner in the adjacent cell. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a strange, almost translucent sheen to his skin that gave off a faint glow. His features were humanoid but subtly different. Eyes slightly larger, his nose flatter, and his ears tapered. Despite the alien appearance, he carried himself like any seasoned soldier Jake had ever known. "Name's Varric," the alien said. "You're the one they brought in yesterday, right?" "Yeah," Jake replied cautiously. "Jake." "Well, Jake," Varric said, leaning against the bars of his cell. "It looks like we'll be cell block neighbors for a while." Jake hesitated, then asked, "Do you know how long they'll keep us here?" Varric gave a low chuckle. "Depends. Me? They think I'm a smuggler. For you? Probably until they figure out what to do with a human. They don't get many of your kind out here." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do anything wrong. They think I was smuggling weapons, but I wasn't. I was just looking for some ship parts. They always say that." Another voice chimed in from a cell farther down. A wiry alien with orange-tinted skin and two short, curved horns on his head stood behind his bars, grinning. "Everybody in here's innocent. I'm sure the Nurkins will totally believe you and let you go." Jake ignored the jab. "So what happens now?" "They'll probably call you in for questioning," Varric said, his tone more serious. "Standard protocol. Answer what you can, don't answer what you can't. They'll try to intimidate you, maybe even trip you up. Just don't lose your cool." Jake frowned. "What about you? What's your story?" Varric smirked. "You want my life story or the short version?" "Short version," Jake said. "We've got plenty of time, but I'd rather not sit here all day." Varric folded his arms and leaned against the wall. "I'm an independent trader. Been running cargo across the quadrant for years. Some of it, maybe not entirely legal, but nothing too serious. Nurkins caught me on a technicality, a cargo manifest that didn't match their standards. Now I'm here, waiting for them to decide if I'm worth prosecuting or just deporting." Jake tilted his head. "So why haven't they just sent you off-world yet?" "Because they're greedy," Varric said. "They'll hold me long enough to try and squeeze a bribe out of my contacts. Typical Nurkin bureaucracy." Jake thought about that for a moment, then asked, "And the others in here?" "Same deal." "Mostly," Varric replied. "That guy down the hall, Grekin, he's a scavenger. Picked apart a derelict ship that apparently still belonged to someone important. A few others here are just unlucky travelers who ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time." Jake's mind whirred. "There's got to be a way out of this." "Good luck with that," Grekin said from his cell. "If you're thinking escape, think again. The security here's tighter than a Brocari knot." Jake turned back to Varric. "What about you? You don't seem like the kind of guy who just sits around waiting for things to happen." Varric gave a slow nod. "True, but I've learned to pick my battles. I've been watching the guards, studying their routines. If an opportunity presents itself, I'll take it. But I'm not rushing into anything. Not yet." Jake nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "Fair enough. What can you tell me about this place? Any weaknesses?" Varric hesitated, then said, "There's a maintenance corridor a few levels down that isn't as heavily patrolled, and the guards rotate shifts every 8 hours. If someone had the right access codes, they might be able to slip out unnoticed during the shift change." Jake's mind started piecing together the puzzle. He glanced down the corridor and said quietly, "What if we work together? You've got the experience, I've got the stubbornness. We might stand a better chance as a team." Varric raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we partner up?" "Why not?" Jake said. "Better than sitting here waiting for them to decide our fate." You want out, I want out. Let's figure something out together. Varric studied Jake for a long moment before giving a slow, almost reluctant smile. You might be onto something, but if we do this, we do it carefully. One misstep and we'll both be stuck here for good. Agreed, Jake said, a determined edge in his voice. Let's keep our eyes open, watch their patterns, and see what we can figure out. Varric nodded. All right, Jake. Let's see what we can do. Chapter 3. The Interrogation. Jake sat at a metal table in a room that felt both sterile and imposing. A faint hum from overhead lights made the silence heavier, and the smooth walls seemed designed to dampen sound and break any sense of comfort. Across from him, two Nurkan officers sat, their angular, gray-skinned faces impassive, their large, lidless eyes unblinking. I already told you, I wasn't smuggling anything, Jake said, leaning forward. His voice sounded loud in the room's stillness. You were found in possession of restricted items, the taller officer stated, his voice calm but firm. The evidence is irrefutable. Jake held his hands up, exasperated. The so-called evidence was cargo I legally purchased at a public market. Maybe your system flagged it as restricted, but I wasn't hiding anything. I declared every item at the dock. The second officer, shorter and stockier, folded his arms. Our systems don't make mistakes, human. The penalties for smuggling are severe, as you may well know. Jake leaned back, glancing at the ceiling in frustration. How am I supposed to prove my innocence when you've already decided I'm guilty? The taller officer's gaze didn't waver. That's for you to determine. Cooperation may improve your situation. Non-cooperation will not. Right? Jake muttered. Because being cooperative with the guys accusing me of a crime I didn't commit sounds like a winning strategy. The shorter officer began typing something on a sleek device in front of him. A moment later, the door behind them slid open with a faint hiss. Jake turned his head to see another figure enter. Zara, an officer Jake recognized from the previous day. Her presence changed the atmosphere immediately. The two male officers straightened slightly, their postures tense but deferential. Zara was clearly their superior. She didn't sit. Instead, she circled the table slowly, her eyes narrowing as she studied Jake. Unlike the others, Zara's features carried a sharp, no-nonsense expression that somehow seemed more thoughtful than hostile. Human, she began, her voice level but commanding. You have a reputation. Jake blinked. A reputation? I didn't realize I was famous. You are not, she replied curtly. But your species is known for unpredictability. I've reviewed your case. The cargo you carried was restricted, yes, but you don't fit the profile of a professional smuggler. Your background shows no previous criminal activity. This inconsistency is puzzling. Jake held her gaze. So what does that mean? That you're starting to believe me? Zara didn't answer immediately. She stopped pacing and stood at the end of the table, her hands resting lightly on its edge. It means I have questions. Jake gave a short laugh. Join the club. I have questions too. Like why I'm sitting here while the real criminals are probably out there laughing it up. Zara tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. If you wish to leave this place, you'll need to do more than complain. You claim you're innocent. Convince me. Jake leaned forward again, his expression serious. Look, I'm a pilot. I fly routes between trade hubs, moving legal goods for legal clients. This was supposed to be a routine cargo pickup. I had no reason to hide anything. When I landed, I filled out your forms, followed your protocols. Then suddenly I'm being tackled by your goons and accused of smuggling weapons. If I'm missing something, tell me. What exactly are you saying I was carrying? Zara glanced at the shorter officer, who brought up a display on his tablet. A holographic projection flickered to life above the table, showing a long, cylindrical object. This, Zara said, a high-capacity plasma coil, restricted technology, used primarily in advanced weapon systems. Jake frowned. I never bought that. It wasn't on my manifest. If it was in my cargo, someone must have planted it. Convenient excuse, the shorter officer said under his breath. Jake shot him a glare. It's not an excuse. If you think I'm lying, check the footage from the loading dock. I'd bet my ship someone slipped it in without my knowledge. Zara considered this for a moment, then addressed the taller officer. Has the dock footage been reviewed? Not yet, Officer Zara, he replied. Then do it, she ordered. Now. The officer nodded and left the room without another word. Zara turned her attention back to Jake. If your story checks out, you'll be released, she said. If it doesn't, you'll remain here until further notice. Jake's jaw tightened. And how long will that take? That depends, Zara said. But I will ensure the review is done quickly. As she turned to leave, Jake couldn't help but speak up. Zara, officer, whatever you are, thanks for at least looking into it. She paused at the door, glancing back at him. Her expression softened for a split second, almost imperceptibly, before she stepped out, leaving Jake alone with the remaining officer. The silence returned, heavy and uncomfortable. But for the first time since his arrest, he felt a flicker of hope. If Zara was willing to investigate, maybe he had a chance to prove the truth. Chapter 4. An unlikely ally. Hours blurred together in the cold, sterile cell. Jake leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on the thin slit of a window that offered no real view. It was the only thing keeping him from losing track of time completely. His thoughts spun between the accusations, the interrogation, and Zara's brief moment of what almost felt like understanding. Almost. The sound of footsteps broke through his spiral of thoughts. He straightened, craning his neck toward the hallway. The door slid open, revealing Zara, this time without the usual squad of guards. She held a slim device in her hand and an unreadable expression on her face. You again, Jake said dryly. Did you come to arrest me twice? She ignored the jab and stepped inside, the door closing behind her. The review of the loading dock footage confirmed your story. The plasma coil was planted by a dock worker, who has since fled. Jake's mouth opened, then shut. So, I'm free to go. Zara hesitated. Not yet. The situation has complicated political implications. The individual who planted the coil appears to have ties to a group that operates beyond Nurkan jurisdiction. If we release you now, it may attract the wrong attention. Jake folded his arms. So I'm innocent, but you're keeping me here anyway. Makes perfect sense. I am explaining the situation, Zara replied coolly. Your innocence is no longer in question, but your release requires careful handling. If you were to leave the planet immediately, the people responsible for framing you might see it as a loose end to tie up. Jake stared at her. So you're keeping me here for my own safety? In a manner of speaking, she said. And for ours. That's convenient, Jake muttered. Zara's expression shifted, her usual sternness softening slightly. I am trying to help you, human. I didn't have to share this information, but you should understand that this is not as simple as letting you walk free. Jake sighed and leaned back against the wall. All right, let's say I believe you. What now? Do I just sit in this cell and wait for you to figure out how to clean up this mess? Zara's gaze held his. I have a proposal. Jake raised an eyebrow. A proposal? I need someone who can move through certain sectors of this facility without drawing attention. Someone whose presence won't be immediately associated with me or my team. Jake frowned. You're saying you want me to help you. The guy you just admitted was wrongfully accused. I'm saying you can help yourself, Zara corrected. You're stuck here until this situation is resolved. If you assist me in gathering information on who framed you, and why, you'll speed up the process of clearing your name and getting off this planet. You have a unique advantage. You're an outsider. No one here expects you to be working with us. Jake studied her face. Her calm tone and steady gaze made it clear that she wasn't joking. What exactly do you need me to do? I'll provide you with a device, she said, holding up the slim gadget in her hand. It will give you access to certain restricted areas, but only for brief windows of time. I need you to retrieve data from a terminal in the administrative wing. Nothing complex. Just plug this in, let it run, and return it to me. Why can't one of your people do it? Jake asked, crossing his arms. Because they're already being watched, Zara said bluntly. And if I'm caught accessing that data, it could expose our entire investigation. But you're just a human prisoner. No one will suspect you. Jake hesitated, weighing his options. On one hand, this sounded like a dangerous game. On the other hand, sitting in this cell and hoping for the best wasn't exactly appealing either. All right, he said at last. I'll do it. But only because I want to get out of here as soon as possible. Zara nodded. Good. I'll return shortly with the device and instructions. Be ready. She turned and headed for the door. Just before she stepped out, Jake called after her. Hey, Zara. She paused and looked back, her expression still unreadable. Thanks for trusting me. For a moment, her sharp features softened. Let's hope I don't regret it. Chapter 5, The Escape Plan. Jake sat on the edge of his bunk, turning the small, sleek device over in his hands. He'd spent the past hour staring at it, memorizing its features and trying to imagine how the hell this little gadget was supposed to help him sneak past a dozen guards and into a restricted area. Zara hadn't been back since their last conversation, but her instructions were clear. Use the device to get the data from the administrative wing's secure terminal. Simple on paper, a nightmare in practice. The door to the cell block hissed open, and Jake glanced up. Varric, the other prisoner. You had a visitor. What's the story? Jake hesitated. He didn't know how much he could trust Varric, but he also couldn't see a way out of this place without some help. Zara's asking me to do something. Says it'll help clear my name. Let me guess, Varric said, his grin widening. She wants you to go where her people can't, and you're supposed to just trust her. That about sums it up, Jake said, setting the device down on the bunk beside him. Well, I'll give her this. She's got guts. Nurkins usually don't stick their necks out for anyone, much less a human. Varric pushed off the bars and stepped into Jake's cell as though it were his own. You're gonna need a plan, though. That gadget alone won't be enough. Jake frowned. What do you mean? She said it would get me access. Access, sure, Varric said, sitting on the opposite bunk. But it won't cover your tracks if someone notices you're where you shouldn't be. And trust me, someone will notice. You'll need a distraction. Maybe even some backup. Jake raised an eyebrow. You volunteering? Varric's grin didn't waver. I'm just saying it's a two-man job at least. One of us runs interference, the other grabs the data. The guards start chasing me, you get in and out clean. It's a win-win. And how do I know you won't just leave me hanging? Jake asked, crossing his arms. Because if you get caught, I'm stuck here too, Varric said simply. Your escape is my escape. We both want out of this place, right? Jake studied him for a long moment. Varric's easy demeanor didn't waver, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a calculated kind of confidence. He wasn't just offering help out of the goodness of his heart. He saw an opportunity, same as Jake. Still, having someone watch his back sounded a hell of a lot better than going solo. All right, Jake said finally. What do you have in mind? Varric leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. There's a maintenance corridor that runs parallel to the main administrative wing. It's not heavily patrolled, but it's got cameras. We'll need to create a commotion on the other side of the block to draw the guards and force them to shift their patrols. Once that happens, we have a window to slip in. And what kind of commotion are you planning? Jake asked. Varric smirked. Ever heard of a Nurkin flash pod? Jake shook his head. It's a little device the maintenance crews use for emergency lighting. If you set one off in the right spot, it'll cause a temporary blackout in a few nearby corridors. Nothing serious, but it's enough to make the guards scramble. You know where to get one of these pods? Jake asked. Sure, Varric said. The storage locker in the West Wing. We just need to borrow a keycard. Jake rolled his eyes. Of course. And how are we supposed to get a keycard? Leave that to me, Varric said confidently. I've been watching the guards for weeks. There's one who takes a regular break in the lounge near here. He always leaves his keycard on the table. If we time it right, I can grab it while he's distracted. Jake sighed. Fine. So you grab the keycard, we get the flash pod, and then we set it off. That still leaves us sneaking into the admin wing. That's the easy part, Varric said with a shrug. Once the blackout hits, I'll stay behind to make sure the guards are chasing shadows. You take that fancy gadget Zara gave you, get the data, and get out. I'll meet you back here. And if something goes wrong? Jake asked. It won't, Varric said. But if it does, I'll handle it. You just focus on getting that data. Jake ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the plan pressing down on him. It was risky, no doubt about it. But it was also the best shot he had at proving his innocence and getting out of this place. All right, he said, meeting Varric's gaze. Let's do it. Varric's grin widened. That's the spirit. Now let's get to work. Chapter 6. Breaking Out. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched behind a row of supply crates. The maintenance corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by flickering panels that buzzed faintly. Beside him, Varric knelt with his back pressed against the wall, his sharp, translucent features tense. Despite his usual calm exterior, even Varric couldn't hide the slight tremor in his voice as he whispered, "We set the flash pod here. Once it triggers, the guards will come running. That's your cue to head to the admin wing." Jake nodded, gripping the small device Zara had given him. "And you'll keep them busy?" "Sure," Varric said with a faint grin. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. You just make sure to get what we came for and get back here fast." Jake adjusted the scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. It was a minor effort at blending in, even if his human appearance was a dead giveaway. "Right? Let's get this over with." Varric activated the flash pod, a cylindrical object no bigger than a soda can. It emitted a soft, pulsing glow as its timer began counting down. "Once it goes off, you've got about 5 minutes before the guards figure out it's nothing serious. Move quick." "Got it," Jake said. He peeked around the crates, scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. "You sure they'll take the bait?" "They always do," Varric said. "Nurkins hate disruptions, and they hate surprises even more. When this thing goes off, they'll be too busy chasing shadows to worry about you." Before Jake could respond, the pod gave a low beep. A second later, a flash of light filled the corridor, followed by a sharp buzz. The lights overhead flickered wildly, then went dark. Emergency strips along the floor flicked on, casting everything in a dull, blue glow. "Showtime," Varric said, slipping out from behind the crates. He gave Jake a quick nod before disappearing down another corridor, his footsteps fading into the distance. Jake took a deep breath and moved. He hugged the wall, his steps light and careful, as he made his way toward the administrative wing. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence. The faint hiss of air vents, the soft hum of emergency lighting. He kept his eyes on the dimly glowing strips on the floor, using them as a guide. When he reached the door to the admin wing, he paused. 2 guards stood at the entrance, their backs to him. One of them spoke into a communicator, his words muffled but tense. The other shifted nervously, clearly on edge after the flash pod incident. Jake clenched his jaw. This wasn't part of the plan. Zara had assured him the admin wing wouldn't be heavily guarded. But these two looked anything but lax. He weighed his options. There wasn't enough cover to sneak past them unnoticed. He needed a distraction, something small to draw their attention away just long enough for him to slip inside. His eyes landed on a service cart parked nearby, loaded with crates of cleaning supplies. He crept toward it, careful not to make a sound, and nudged one of the crates off the edge. It fell with a loud crash, spilling its contents across the floor. "What was that?" one guard said, spinning around. "Go check it out," the other ordered. The first guard moved toward the source of the noise, his weapon drawn. Jake waited until the second guard's attention shifted to his partner before making his move. He slid past them and reached the door. The device Zara had given him fit neatly into the control panel. He pressed a button, and the lock disengaged with a quiet click. He slipped inside, his heart racing, and found himself in a small office lined with shelves and consoles. The terminal he needed was at the far end of the room, glowing faintly in the blue emergency light. Jake didn't waste time. He crossed the room, inserted Zara's device into the terminal, and watched as a progress bar appeared on the screen. "Hurry up," he muttered under his breath, his eyes darting to the door. He could hear muffled voices outside. More guards responding to the commotion Varric had caused. The progress bar inched forward, painfully slow. Jake clenched his fists, willing it to move faster. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the screen flashed green. The download was complete. Jake yanked the device out of the terminal and tucked it into his pocket. He retraced his steps, slipping back out into the corridor. The guards were still distracted, their backs turned. Jake ducked into a maintenance hatch, following the route Varric had mapped out earlier. He moved quickly, his pulse pounding in his ears, until he reached the rendezvous point. Varric was already there, leaning casually against the wall. "Took you long enough," he said with a smirk. Jake exhaled a shaky laugh. "Had a couple of unexpected visitors. What about you? You run into trouble?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Varric said. "Now let's get back before anyone notices we're missing." They moved together, slipping through the corridors and back to the cell block. When they finally reached their cells, Jake let out a long breath. He handed the device back to Varric. "That was cutting it close." "Close is good," Varric said with a grin. "Means it worked." Jake shook his head. "Remind me never to get locked up with you again." Varric chuckled. "I wouldn't count on it, Jake. We make a pretty good team." Chapter 7, Exposing the Truth. Jake and Varric stood side by side in the central control room, their faces illuminated by the glow of the terminal. The data Jake had stolen was displayed on the monitor. Detailed cargo manifests, coded messages, and the identity of the dock worker who had planted the contraband. They had spent the last few hours going through it, piecing together the bigger picture. It wasn't just one corrupt individual. It was a web of illegal activity involving several Nurkan officials and a powerful smuggling syndicate. "This is it," Jake said, his voice low. "This proves I was set up. It's all here. Shipments, transactions, communication logs." "Yeah," Varric agreed, scrolling through the files. "And it's bigger than just you. Looks like these guys have been running this operation for years. High-level people, too." Jake clenched his jaw. "How do we get this to Zara?" Varric smirked. "I thought you didn't trust her." "I don't have a choice," Jake admitted. "She's the only one in a position to do anything about this. And if we just sit on this information, we're as good as guilty." Varric gave a short nod. "All right, she's usually in the council chambers around this time. We can." Before he could finish, the door slid open and Zara walked in. Her sharp gaze moved quickly between the two men, then to the terminal screen. She didn't look surprised, but there was a tension in her stance that hadn't been there before. "You're faster than I thought," Zara said, crossing her arms. "I expected you to bring this to me, not set up your own briefing." "We didn't have time to wait," Jake said, gesturing to the data. "This proves everything. The dock worker, the smuggling ring, the people protecting them. It's all here." Zara stepped closer to the terminal, scanning the files. "So you're saying you're not only innocent, but you've uncovered a major criminal operation." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Jake replied. "And now that you know the truth, it's on you to bring it to the council." Zara's expression remained neutral, but her fingers hovered over the controls as she read. "This is substantial. If these documents are real, they implicate high-ranking officials. Presenting this to the council will cause a major upheaval." "You say that like it's a bad thing," Varric said, leaning casually against the wall. "Corruption's corruption. Time to clean house, right?" Zara shot him a look, then turned back to the terminal. "It's not that simple. If I present this without corroboration, I'll be accused of fabricating evidence. The council may try to discredit me before I can finish my report." "Then what's the plan?" Jake asked. "Because we didn't risk our necks for you to sit on this." Zara tapped her chin, her eyes narrowing in thought. "We'll need a witness. Someone who can verify the information and provide first-hand testimony." The dock worker who planted the coil would be ideal. Jake crossed his arms. He's gone. Probably halfway across the galaxy by now. Not necessarily, Zara said. The data includes communication logs. If we trace the last few transmissions, we might find where he's hiding. Once we have him, we can compel him to testify. That's a big if, Varric said, raising an eyebrow. If he's on the run, he's not going to waltz back here to confess. We don't need him to come here, Zara countered. We just need to locate him, gather more evidence from his hiding place, and then present everything to the council. If we move quickly, we can make it happen. Jake frowned. And if it doesn't? Zara's gaze was steady. Then I'll take the risk and present the evidence on my own. But I'd rather have a solid case. Varric shrugged. Sounds like you're going to need us again. I might, Zara admitted. But this time it will have to be done carefully. The council's eyes will be on us, and one wrong move could shut down the investigation. Jake nodded, determination building in his chest. All right, let's find that dock worker. We've come this far, we're not stopping now. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. The council chamber was quieter than Jake had imagined. He stood near the front, flanked by Zara and Varric, while the Nurkan council members reviewed the data presented on a large central display. The information Zara had compiled was irrefutable. Records of illegal shipments, bribes, and the involvement of several key officials. The dock worker's testimony, transmitted via a secure connection from his hiding place, was the final piece of the puzzle. This is troubling, one of the counselors said, his long fingers tapping the edge of his podium. If these claims hold, it would mean corruption at the highest levels of our administration. It holds, Zara said firmly. I have verified every piece of data, and the witness's testimony confirms the pattern. The individuals responsible for framing this human, and countless others, must be held accountable. Another counselor, a wiry Nurkan with pale blue skin, glanced toward Jake. And you, human, you claim no involvement in these activities. Jake met her gaze. I didn't claim anything. Your own data proves I was set up. I was just a convenient scapegoat. The council murmured among themselves, the sound a low drone that echoed through the chamber. Finally, the lead counselor raised his hand for silence. We will need time to fully investigate these findings, he said. However, given the evidence provided, we see no reason to hold Mr. Pearson any longer. His innocence is clear. Jake exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from his chest. It was over. Months of uncertainty and confinement, and now he was free to leave. Additionally, the lead counselor continued, Officer Zara, your efforts in uncovering this corruption will be recognized. You have done a great service to Nurka and its people. Zara gave a small nod of acknowledgement, though her expression remained serious. Jake knew her well enough by now to see that she wasn't interested in accolades. She cared about what the evidence would change, not the credit she'd receive. The session ended with a formal adjournment. Jake and Varric followed Zara out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing down the long corridor. So that's it, Varric said, glancing at Zara. You're back in their good graces now? They'll investigate the higher-ups involved, Zara replied, her tone measured. It won't be quick, but it's a start. The council can't ignore the evidence now. Jake caught her eye. And me? Am I officially free to go? Yes, Zara said. You're no longer under suspicion. Your record is clear. Jake nodded slowly. He'd been fighting for this moment ever since he was first arrested. But now that it was here, he didn't feel the rush of relief he'd expected. There was still something unresolved. So what happens now? Jake asked. For you, I mean. Zara tilted her head slightly. I'll remain here and ensure the investigation proceeds. Corruption this deep doesn't disappear overnight. It will take time and vigilance. And you, Varric said, turning to Jake. You're heading back to human space? I take it? That was the plan, Jake said. But after everything we've been through, I'm not so sure. Varric raised an eyebrow. Not sure? The galaxy's a big place, friend. You're free to go anywhere. Yeah, it is, Jake replied, looking past them down the long corridor. But I'm not in a hurry. Maybe I'll stick around a while longer. See how things shake out. Zara's eyes met his, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. You'd be welcome, she said quietly. Jake smiled faintly. Good to know. Varric gave a small laugh, clapping Jake on the back. Well, wherever you go, it won't be boring. That's for damn sure. They walked together down the corridor, leaving behind the tension of the council chamber. The weight of their ordeal was still there, but the path forward was finally clear.